The Second World War was a conflict of visible horror, the scorched earth of the Eastern Front, the bombed cities of Britain. But the war's most decisive theater, the one that guaranteed the eventual invasion of Europe and determined the fate of the Lend-Lease supplies, was the icy, unseen vastness of the North Atlantic. This was the Battle of the Atlantic, a fight to the death where the stakes were not territory, but the very lifeblood of the Allied war machine. Every bullet fired, every tank assembled, and every loaf of bread baked in Britain had to first cross this 3,000-mile stretch of unforgiving water. For years, this battle was dominated by one force, the German U-boat. And for years, the U-boats held an advantage that seemed invincible, guided by a secret weapon far more powerful than any torpedo, the ability to read the enemy's mail. The story of this conflict, fought with mathematics, mechanical engineering, and sheer human endurance, culminated on a single day, March 17, 1943, when German intelligence, in a devastating moment of truth, was forced to confront the impossible, and knew the war was lost. The man who conceived this lethal strategy was Grand Admiral KarlDönitz. Possessing a singular, fanatical belief in the U-boat as the ultimate weapon, he recognized that Britain was an island fortress, utterly dependent on global supply lines. His objective was not a grand naval battle, but methodical, logistical strangulation. Dönitz's revolutionary wolf pack tactic, coordinated massed attacks by U-boats, would shatter the convoy system. Instead of single submarines hunting alone, Dönitz directed dozens of U-boats to converge on a single convoy, overwhelming the meager escort forces. He was driven by a simple, brutal formula: if he could sink 750,000 tons of Allied shipping per month, Britain would collapse. But the true genius behind this early dominance was cryptographic. Germany possessed the world's most advanced code-breaking unit, the B-Dienst, observation service. While the Allies were complacent, B-Dienst analysts, led by brilliant minds like Captain Heinz Benatz, were exploiting weaknesses in British cipher procedures. They were not finding ships by chance, they were directed straight to them. The B-Dienst reliably cracked the less secure ciphers used by the British Admiralty to route its convoys. This ability to provide pinpoint intelligence meant U-boat commanders could conserve fuel, avoid patrols, and ambush convoys with devastating impunity. Commanders would surface in the middle of a convoy lane, alerted hours in advance, and sink multiple ships before the escorts could even react. This period, from 1940 to 1941, was known to the U-boat crews as the happy time. Allied shipping losses soared, with U-boats sinking up to 150 ships in a single month. Merchant ships, crewed by selfless men and women, were sunk faster than they could be built. The psychological impact was immense: coastal lights were dimmed, food rationing became severe, and the entire island lived under the perpetual fear of starvation. The sheer scale of the threat paralyzed Allied planning. Winston Churchill later confessed that the U-boat menace was the only thing that ever really frightened me during the war. The German war effort was built on the foundation of this unbreakable intelligence security. Across the Channel, Britain's survival was being decided in the quiet Victorian halls of Bletchley Park. Here, mathematicians, classicists, linguists, and engineers, assembled in an eccentric and brilliant collective, waged the secret war against the German U-boat's communication system, built around the seemingly uncrackable Enigma cipher machine. The core challenge was one of pure mathematics, compounded by time. Enigma, with its 3 spinning rotors, offered billions of possible settings, but every 24 hours, the Germans changed the key. The stakes were raised exponentially in 1942 when Dönitz introduced the new, far more secure 4-rotor Enigma machine for the U-boat fleet. The Germans codenamed it Triton, the British called it Shark. The 4th rotor, which significantly increased the period before the key combinations repeated, plunged the Allies into a terrifying intelligence blackout that lasted for 10 dark, devastating months. Losses mounted, and the Allied command was blind, sailing convoys based purely on guesswork. The effort to break this new code was led by the legendary Alan Turing. He and his team realized that cracking Enigma required not just human ingenuity, but mechanical speed. They designed the massive, clattering electromechanical Bombay decryption machines, which searched for the daily Enigma key. But even the Bombay needed starting points, known as cribs, likely German phrases in the encrypted messages, like keine besondere Ereignisse, or nothing to report. The four-rotor Enigma demanded more. It required vital physical starting points, the cipher settings or internal wiring diagrams, that had to be captured from the German crews through a series of desperate, high-stakes seizures at sea, operations that were as dangerous as any frontline combat. The tide began to turn with acts of immense naval daring and profound sacrifice. The capture of key Enigma materials from U-110 in 1941, and then the vital cipher keys from U-559 in late 1942, an operation in which British sailors sacrificed their lives to dive into the sinking U-boat, provided the final, missing pieces of the puzzle for the Triton machine. With these rotors and settings, the Bombay machines roared to life. Bletchley Park began to consistently and rapidly break the U-boat's encrypted messages. The resulting intelligence, cloaked under the code name Ultra, was the single greatest intelligence asset of the entire war. Ultra was the perfect counterpoint to the B-Dienst's earlier success. It provided the Allies with not just general knowledge, but foreknowledge, the precise strategic orders issued by Grand Admiral Dönitz. The Allied command knew the exact paths of the wolf packs, their refueling points, and what their next mission would be, before the U-boats even received their own orders. This allowed the British Admiralty to practice sophisticated deception through a system called special intelligence. To protect the ultra-secret, the convoys would not simply sail away from the U-boats, instead, they would appear to stumble upon U-boats or reroute convoys just seconds before the U-boats arrived. These evasive maneuvers, masked as luck or good sea sense by Allied commanders, always maintained the illusion that the code remained secure. The cryptographic tables had officially been flipped, making the Allies the hunter and the U-boats the unsuspecting prey, operating on a strategic level the Germans couldn't fathom. Ultra-intelligence, however, was only half the solution. Its value was amplified by a rapid and overwhelming technological revolution on the Allied side, the true technological hammer that began to crush the U-boat force. The most critical innovation was the introduction of centimetric radar. Previous radar was clumsy, easily jammed, and detectable by the Germans. The new centimetric sets, powered by the secret cavity magnetron developed in Britain, operated on a 10-centimeter wavelength. These new sets were small, powerful, and utterly undetectable by the German U-boat receiving equipment, the Metox, which could only pick up older, longer wavelengths. Fitted to long-range patrol aircraft like the American consolidated B-24 Liberator, this radar finally closed the dreaded mid-Atlantic gap, the vast Central Ocean area previously unreachable by shore-based air cover. U-boat commanders who surfaced at night to recharge batteries suddenly found themselves surprised by Liberators seemingly appearing from thin air, dropping bombs before the submarine could crash dive. The U-boats had lost their crucial cloak of darkness and safety. Furthermore, Allied escort ships were equipped with new, lethal weapons and tactics. The Hedgehog anti-submarine mortar, for instance, fired contact-fused bombs forward, allowing escorts to maintain continuous sonar contact while attacking, a massive tactical improvement over traditional depth charges, which required the escort to lose contact while passing over the target. New training, new ships, and new air cover transformed the hunters into the hunted. Yet, Grand Admiral Dönitz, blinded by his absolute faith in the security of the Enigma, attributed the mounting losses to radar, Allied air superiority, or operational carelessness. He was leading his fleet into a trap he refused to acknowledge. The catastrophic collision between German delusion and Allied technological superiority occurred in mid-March 1943. Two massive Allied convoys, HX-229, sailing from New York, and SC-122, sailing from Halifax, were steaming toward the European coast, carrying over 100 merchant ships vital to Britain's survival. Dönitz, confident in the integrity of his ciphers, directed multiple large wolf packs, including Group Stürmer, consisting of nearly 40 U-boats, straight into their path, relying entirely on his intercepted intelligence. It was the largest convoy battle of the entire war. From March 16 to 19, the North Atlantic was a scene of unrelenting violence. The weather was a vicious element, massive waves, fog, and freezing temperatures challenged both sides. The U-boats, despite their diminished technological advantage, achieved a devastating tactical success. Using their combined strength, they managed to sink 21 merchant ships, representing over 140,000 tons of desperately needed cargo. It was a staggering loss, seemingly proving Dönitz right. But beneath the surface chaos, the British escorts were exhibiting behavior that was chillingly precise. Commanders like Lieutenant Commander Peter Gretton, knowing when and where the wolf packs were ordered to assemble thanks to Ultra, maneuvered his meager 5 escort ships with impossible foreknowledge. They were able to anticipate the U-boat's movements hours in advance, a fact not lost on one specific group of German observers. The strategic war was about to be decided not by the U-boats that fired, but by the intelligence unit that watched. On the morning of March 17, 1943, amidst the chaos of the massive convoy battle, the German B-Dienst analysts compiled their reports. They weren't reading Enigma, but they were still able to track the less secure British tactical communications, and the patterns they observed were surgically precise and terrifying. British destroyers were repeatedly detouring around U-boat waiting lines before the Germans had even sighted the convoy. Escorts launched accurate depth charge attacks against U-boats immediately after the U-boats made their initial contact report, a piece of crucial data that should have only been known to Dönitz's headquarters moments later. The analysts were highly trained to look for patterns, and the pattern here pointed to a catastrophic breach. The evidence was irrefutable. The British escorts were not reacting to the battle, they were preempting it. The B-Dienst delivered its finding with stark clarity. The only possible explanation for this impossible efficiency was the compromise of the German ciphers. This internal report, delivered on St. Patrick's Day, meant the last unit trusted to be objective, German intelligence, was forced to admit the crippling truth to Dönitz: Enigma was broken. Yet, Dönitz, who had staked his entire strategic career and his reputation on the machine's security, recoiled in a state of absolute strategic denial. He refused to accept a failure so fundamental, arguing that it was impossible to break the Enigma key and that the losses were merely attributable to the new, powerful radar and Allied air superiority. Dönitz, trapped by technological conservatism and an inability to believe his most secure weapon was turned against him, refused to stop, doubling down on his strategy and sending the wolf packs back out into the North Atlantic. The consequences of Dönitz's denial were swift and devastating. The Allies, now fully unleashed and reading almost every U-boat message, executed a campaign of surgical destruction that followed the March 17 realization. The bloodbath that followed in May 1943 became known in the U-boat service as Black May. The statistics are harrowing. In that single, horrific month, Germany lost 43 U-boats, roughly 25% of the entire operational Atlantic fleet, and over 6,000 highly trained sailors. At this point, the Allies were sinking U-boats 5 times faster than Germany could build them. U-boat commanders began calling the North Atlantic the Great Washing Machine or the Atlantic Coffin. Morale plummeted. Young, fresh commanders who had never seen the happy time were sent out, only to be ambushed and killed within weeks. The U-boat service had been decimated in a single season. Faced with this impossible casualty rate, which threatened to completely wipe out his elite force, Dönitz had no choice but to radio a general order on May 24, 1943. He withdrew the majority of his U-boats from the North Atlantic, effectively conceding the battle for the ocean. The B-Dienst's chill realization on March 17 had become strategic reality less than 2 months later. The Allied lifeline was permanently secured, providing the logistical foundation that would allow the invasion of Europe to proceed on D-Day in 1944. The German spies had confirmed what the frontline commanders had already experienced: the war, at its most fundamental strategic and logistical level, could no longer be won. The fate of the Third Reich was sealed not on the battlefield, but in the silent war of ciphers beneath the North Atlantic waves.